The Internal Revenue Service collects more than $3.5 trillion in taxes, roughly 95% of the federal revenue. And it manages the distribution of more than $370 billion every year in refunds. The revenue the IRS collects for the federal government funds critical programs and benefits like Social Security, Medicare, and Veterans Health Services. The billions of dollars in refunds distributed to taxpayers each year is a lifeline for many Americans, especially those at or living below the poverty line. The IRS is a critical agency that we turn to in the nation's hour of dire need. Today's hearing will examine how that agency was ill-prepared to meet those needs. We'll look at how decades of deliberate starvation of the IRS prompted a dire financial situation and left an agency with what a former taxpayer advocate referred to as a prehistoric IT infrastructure. We'll show how a decade of attrition hindered the IRS's ability to meet the complex needs of our nation during the unprecedented pandemic and attendant economic collapse. According to the Congressional Budget Office, from 2010 through 2018, when Republicans were in control of the Congress, lawmakers cut the IRS budget 20% in inflation-adjusted dollars, resulting in a 22% staff reduction. 30% of these staff were in the IRS enforcement positions. After years of disinvestment in IRS enforcement capacity, unpaid annual taxes, owed but not collected, are estimated at $450 billion a year. The starvation and chronic underfunding also prevented the IRS from investing in IT systems. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration's report entitled Legacy Systems Management Needs Improvement, which finds that nearly 3/4 of the 400 active IRS systems reviewed by the TIGTA are legacy systems, meaning very old. Another disturbing finding is that in that report was that the IRS does not have a handle on how many legacy systems it actually has or the costs associated with those systems. This does not sound like an agency ready to fully serve the American people during a pandemic. This past year has highlighted just how many individuals rely on the IRS. In addition to administering the 2020 tax filing system, the IRS was also tasked with distributing emergency economic impact payments or stimulus checks to Americans. The IRS had to manage the effects of the pandemic while it was simultaneously expected to mail 170 million additional stimulus checks to Americans in need. Years of IT system neglect and a failure to modernize legacy systems that date back to the Kennedy administration, in some cases, prevented IRS from effectively transitioning to virtual operations. Like many agencies, the IRS sought to find ways to keep its workforce safe while trying to meet its expanded mission. But it didn't stand a chance. Its gutted workforce and anachronistic IT systems were simply not enough to keep up. The pandemic forced the IRS to shut down many of its core operations across the country, including taxpayer phone lines and walk-in centers. The agency largely abandoned taxpayers, many of whom are all of whom are our constituents, at a moment of great confusion and concern. As I've noticed, the IRS's operational challenges did not happen overnight. As shown in the tables on the screen, since 2010, the previously controlled majority Congress ransacked the IRS's budget, and the agency was forced to reduce its workforce by 22%. That's 20,000 full-time employees. These significant repeated budget cuts forced the IRS to make difficult resource allocation trade-offs. Leaders had to choose among providing quality customer service to taxpayers, enforcing tax laws, and updating IT systems. The severe financial, technical, and staffing problems are a direct result of years of partisan hostility, reckless so-called investigations, and unwarranted budget cuts from the majorities then in control of Congress. And today, when the American people are relying on the IRS the most, the agency is gasping for air. While our witnesses will testify that the IRS did what it could with the available resources, it's what didn't get done that's troubling. It's the millions of taxpayers who were unable and still are unable to get their refunds because they filed a paper return. It's the millions of tax returns that hit a snag, and the corresponding taxpayers couldn't get assistance because call centers were closed. It's the 9 million Americans who have yet to receive that stimulus check from April, primarily because the IRS does not have their information or because their income is so low they don't qualify to file a return. These are our nation's most vulnerable people. We have a duty to help them in the midst of this crisis. Millions of people who desperately rely on the IRS to receive much-needed financial assistance to pay for medical care, groceries, housing, are still waiting for those refunds and stimulus checks. These people are like my constituent Joseph, who did not receive his 2018 tax refund until February of this year because his wife passed away and the IRS held up his return to get more information. The same issue, which the IRS promised Joseph would not be a problem again, plagued his 2020 tax return, which still has not been processed. I ask we insert into the hearing record a statement from Joseph about his continued concerns with the IRS. Other constituents have followed the rules and filed and are being told to just wait. People can't afford to just wait. They need this financial assistance now. On September 16th, I wrote the IRS asking about these types of delays and the inconsistent responses staff have provided our constituents, IRS staff. That was 3 weeks ago. I've yet to receive a response. It's also important to point out that budget cuts to the IRS have burdened our nation's poor in another important way. When the IRS collects taxes each year, it relies heavily on taxpayers to report their income and calculate the amount of tax they owe. Most people, in fact, 99% of them, do. Some taxpayers, however, often the most wealthy among us, including potentially the current President of the United States, fail to properly pay their taxes. They hide earnings, claim dubious deductions such as $70,000 for hairstyling, not a deduction available to most of us, and they fail to properly pay their taxes as a result. Since 2010, as a direct result of these budget cuts from the past, the IRS has done less to enforce tax laws because it can't. If you take a look at the chart on the screen, you'll see that between 2011 and 2019, the percentage of individual income taxes it examined dropped by half. Half. That's catastrophic. And it directly impacts revenue for the federal government. The weakening of these vital oversight efforts harms both taxpayers and public confidence in the tax system. It does, however, help the wealthy and encourages even more of them to skirt and cheat the tax system. I was pleased with the reports on Monday indicating that the IRS is finally investigating allegations of criminal tax fraud at the National Rifle Association. I've long led congressional efforts asking the IRS and the Department of Justice to investigate the NRA and its CEO, Wayne LaPierre. According to studies out of the University of Pennsylvania, by simply beefing up the auditing capacity of the IRS to allow for more oversight of the super wealthy, those claiming more than $10 million in adjusted gross income, our government would collect more than $7.5 trillion over the next decade, more than paying all of the pandemic-related expenses by this federal government combined. That's the size of the tax gap with the wealthy, who fear little consequence right now from a beleaguered IRS and have left in our nation's coffers. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on ways Congress can help support the IRS instead of politically targeting the agency and stripping it bare of the resources it desperately needs, as we've done all too often in the past. We also hope to ensure that the IRS's Chief Information Officer and CIOs throughout the federal government play a pivotal role in developing and meeting agency performance goals. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle toward legislation that does just that. I hope this hearing will garner the evidence and justification needed for Congress to build back the agency that has so unjustly ravished over the last decade. And so it's prepared to help struggling Americans in dire need of assistance during the worst pandemic in 100 years. And with that, I call upon the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Heiss, for his opening statement.